All right, my name is Kent. I've been a member of this club for I think 5 or 6 years. It's been a great time. Learned a lot of things, and I was volunteered to do this couple months ago to do it on color. More or less, this is going to be a beginner demo on color. I'm not the expert here. I just dabble in. Scott Fless started this a while ago, and Ron Campbell has really taken it as far as you can go and even further. So if this interests you at all, I mean, this is a great place to start, but if you really want to talk to an expert at going even further with different techniques and coloring, visit Ron's Facebook page or talk to him. He's in Arizona. So I'm going to start with why color. There's different ways that you can color bowls. You can paint, you can stain, and then you can use dyes. The difference is with paint, the molecules are so big once you apply it, you can't really see anything through it. With stain, your molecules are a little bit smaller, so like as you know with woodworking, you put stain on, you keep putting stain on, you're eventually going to lose any and all grain that you can see through. It more or less sits on top of the wood and adds a color to it. Well, you also know that there's very limited amount of stains that you can use, various colors. You can't really go into like reds, purples, oranges, so on and so forth. With dyes, your molecules are so small that the light is virtually, you can shine right through the dyes, much like your colors on your clothing. I mean, it adds a tint to it, but you can still see the grain of the wood or your clothes or whatever you're applying it to, which makes it very, very neat because it doesn't impede any of the grain that comes through. An example is, I use this piece of figured maple, and it started out with the first couple of coats of tint, and then I just kept on adding 2 coats, 2 coats, 2 coats, 2 coats, and all it did was accentuate the grain inside the wood. It didn't impede it at all, which is why I like using it so much, because you don't lose the beauty of the wood. On what woods can you use it on? Virtually any woods that you want to, I guess, accentuate the grain of it. If you have a boring piece of maple, add a couple of colors to it. People love colors. That's why I'm so limited in the amount of samples I have. I've taken my stuff to the art festival. Virtually all of them have sold. People, it's different, it's new, it's exciting, and people like to show off. You know, it's not a stained piece of wood anymore, or just a boring piece of wood. You can take a simple piece of maple, add a couple of colors to it, and it's a brand new piece. And people, they get really excited about it. You can use it for accenting, you can use it for coloring, or enhancing the grain again. You can use it for furniture. I've done a guitar with it already. If you're familiar with guitars at all, the Fender Squiers or any of the Fenders that you see a sunburst paint job to it, they actually use a trans tint dye to achieve that look to it. To start out with dyeing, as I use a shellac base. There's different ways that you can use tints. What I like is to use the shellac, use the 100% wax-free. I made the mistake of using the regular shellac, took it to a show, it sat out in the sun for 20 minutes, and the entire finish bubbled off. It was awful. And so the only place I found this was at Woodcraft. So get the 100% wax-free shellac, then you won't have an issue with anything finishing like over top of it or any sun bad stuff. And what I usually like to do is start out with a couple of coats after you're finished sanded to maybe a 220 or even a 320, whatever you feel is a good finish sand. Start out with a couple of coats of just raw shellac over it. What that's going to do is it's going to seal the wood you're putting it in. It's kind of like a sanding sealer. Okay, put a couple of coats on that, and then just give it a nice little scratch coat again with maybe a 220, just to get all your imperfections and your shellac off. This is very important because when you add more and more layers of your color, if you go back and sand, it could sand through any rough spots that you have in there, revealing your original wood color that you had before. So if you were going to add, let's say, a blue, and you had a drip, and for your finish sand, your finish buff, if you sand off that drip that you have applied your color to, you sand through that drip, exposing your previous colors or your actual raw wood after you're done. Which, unfortunately, with color, it's an all or nothing deal. You have to apply light coats. You can't lay it on thick, otherwise you're going to get a drip, you're going to get splotching, and then you'll have to start all over, which is kind of a pain in the butt. Which is, again, why I just apply real nice thin coats for a nice uniform finish after you're done. Which brings up why, again, I like to use shellac, and to start out with a couple of coats of shellac, because if you do make a mistake, you can always go back with denatured alcohol. What I use is a spray bottle from Home Depot. I fill it up with the denatured alcohol, because if you want to fix anything or take off your previous layers of color, if you did screw up, you can just apply heavy amounts of the denatured alcohol and it'll come right off. It'll thin your shellac so much that it'll take it right down to your base coat, not ruining your piece. So you have, a way to go back in time and then start over.
So does the shellac prevent it from seeping deep into the pores?
Yes. So like on a piece of curly maple or figured maple that you see here, I put a couple of coats of shellac, didn't let it dry more than a half hour. It's still soaked into those softer pores and darkened a little bit. So if you want a nice continuous, not continuous, an even coat over the top of it, put a couple coats of shellac on there first and it'll seal. It'll be a nice finish afterwards.
I've had it where I've done a piece where I wanted to leave it natural on the outside, colored on the inside, and I used the Transtent just mixed with alcohol. It absorbed through the end grain so fast that it blotted on the outside.
Yeah.
Just through the end grain. So by sealing it ahead of time, you can avoid some of that.
Your dyes, because the molecules are so thin, they soak into the wood instead of sitting on top of it like a stain would. So yeah, I've had it on a thin piece also where even with the shellac, I thin turned it and it transferred from the outside all the way to the inside. So I guess it's better to use it on a thicker piece, more than 1/8 of an inch, so you won't have any of that end grain seepage, which the shellac, the base layer of shellac, also prevents it from soaking in any further. Another technique to use with it is to just cut it directly with alcohol, and you can either spray it or wipe it on at that point. It'll give you an entirely different finish on it. It will not be a smooth finish. Any of you woodworkers have ever tried to stain maple or soft maple know the difficulties of getting a nice continuous, like oak, you can stain it and it's a nice even stain because the oak is so dense, whereas maple, soft maple, it'll soak into the pores, the softer pores, and you'll get a very uneven finish, which isn't that great, for if you want a nice even finish when you're all done with it. Whereas the alcohol will give it a very blotchy, antique, used look, which on some pieces looks great. It really does. Ron does the dab technique on some of his burl pieces, and because it's so dense, it doesn't soak in as much, but it gives it a really neat effect. And you can see some of his things on the club's Facebook page as well. And then you also don't even have to cut it at all. You can just take the dye straight out of the tube and put it right on a rag and dab it on right there, full strength. But let me warn you, this stuff is potent. It's just and expensive. You're talking $20 a tube there. Really hard to get off hands. That's a very good point, very good point. What me and my friend Scott has done is I would buy a bottle of a color that we wanted to share, and then we would split it. So now you're only out $10. And I'm telling you, I've had these for 3 or 4 years. It goes the distance. And as far as storage goes, you can get the expensive storage containers at Woodcraft for $3, $4 a pop, or have a kid. Or get someone. That's cheaper, right? That's cheaper.
I'm not having any.
Right. I love using these baby jars. They're glass, they're airtight, and they're 50 cents a pop. And just get a flavor you like. Ugh. So that's a great way to use it. And supposedly shellac is good for 6 months up to a year. The sample that I use over there, I've had in my garage for over a year, and it still sprayed out really nice. I don't know if it was due to the baby jar being airtight, but it was still good after a year. The amount of trans-tint dye I use for each application is I fill a jar up with the shellac with this. And it depends on the intensity that you want to have on your piece. I typically put 10 to 16 drops into each jar of this. And I'm telling you, this jar right here will do a lot of bowls, a ton of bowls. And I found that the 10 to 16 drop ratio, that was right in the mid-range. It gave me it allowed me to do a lot of coats.
So you fill that jar with your denatured alcohol?
Shellac.
Shellac.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep. I don't use alcohol at all. I like shellac as, for one, a bonder. It finishes out great. It dries super quickly.
Put your color in the shellac.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I put that into my spray can, or you can put it in pretty much any kind of spray apparatus. I just picked up this at Home Depot here. It's a portable spray can. You put whatever you want in here. There's no thinning required for the shellac. And you've got a portable aerosol can right here. And you just put it right back in there. They sell the refills for a few dollars. I think it's $8 to get the whole system. And it comes with a resealable cap. So if you just want to buy a bunch of these deals, you seal it, put it away. When you want to use it, you just...
So would that take pressurized?
Yeah. Yeah, this whole can here is separate from this. It's all pre-pressurized. You just rack it up and go. And it gives you a really nice finish.
Is there a brand name on it?
Pardon?
Is there a brand name on it?
Just a Preval. That's all.
Home Depot, huh?
Also available at Woodcraft.
Also available at Woodcraft.
Now you get 10% if you're military at Home Depot.
There you go.
You gotta have an ID.
How much aerosol capabilities do you have there? Did you fill that jar completely? Would it spray the whole thing through before you release pressure?
The only thing I've sprayed with this is that sample piece. It says it's good for 100 feet of spraying capability. So I can imagine you get at least a couple of bowls worth of spraying out of just one of those refills.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
Were you putting the shellac on dyed first and then putting the dye?
Yes.
The dyed
Yes.
shellac on?
I'm sorry. Yes. Completely undyed. First as a base coat that seals everything in, and then you apply your color. Again, using shellac, it dries after if it's very thin coats of shellac color that you're putting on. It dries within 5 to 10 minutes, and you're able to put another coat on directly on top of it right afterwards. And the more coats you put on, the more in-depth your color is going to be, which is, again, nice with shellac because it melds into the previous layer of shellac. So it kind of, like lacquer, it melds into each other. And it's not kind of layering on top of each other, you're just getting a thicker coat of shellac. Yeah, any other questions about, yeah, let's go with Dick first.
Yeah, what's the difference between the wax-free shellac and regular shellac?
Well, regular shellac is going to have your wax. That's I believe the nature of shellac. No?
It's filtered more
Okay, okay. I've heard that wax will, like if you're trying to do a lacquer finish or a polyurethane finish on top of it, it might have a reaction to the wax in the shellac, so you might get a fish eyeing effect or something that you wouldn't want on top of it. So it's more or less safe. It's more safe just to get a de-waxed shellac, because who wants to set their bowl in front of, let's say, a windowsill and have a reaction to the heat of the sun and have your bowl pop? You know, you don't want your finish ruined from that. So it's just safer to just go with the de-waxed shellac, eliminate any variables, and then just, you know, have a nice looking bowl for years to come. I believe you were next. Okay.
The difference between a regular spray bottle and that is, would there be more dripping with a regular spray bottle?
With spray bottles, I see it as just squirting big drops. And so I don't think you would get a really nice finish off it. I would go with some kind of aerosol or an airless spray gun. I started out with an airbrush. That worked out well for small projects. If you're doing a bigger project like a bowl, I would go get a bigger airbrush from, let's say, Harbor Freight. You can pick one up for $10 to $15. Or a small cup sprayer you can also get from Harbor Freight for $15. That's just a gravity-fed, it's a can on top of a bigger air gun. And that has really, really worked well for me. That's pretty much what I use. It's a little purple air gun that you just hook up a little, hook up your normal compressor to it, maybe put a water filter on it so you don't get any water droplets in your air line. And it has already an air pressure adjuster on the bottom, so maybe to 15 to 20 psi is a great pressure to have that come out at a great finish. You go any less, it'll just start spurting, and so then you get like thicker drops almost. You don't get a nice air to dye ratio, and too much, you won't get a lot of product out. You'll just get a lot of maybe back spray off it.
How do you mask
Oh.
the different colors? You go from one color to the next. How do you do that without getting overspray?
Well, with this, I just used a pinstriping tape I bought at an automotive shop, and then just started with the base color of blue. You can see the maple that came right through. So then I just used, let's see, what did I do? This was 6 months ago or so. Okay, so I shellacked the whole thing, pin taped where I wanted to go, and then shot it with blue, and then covered the entire project with painter's tape, and then pinstriped it, and then cut out with a razor knife, and then peeled back my painter's tape. The only thing you're going to get with, though, if you start mixing colors like I did here, neat part about it is when the red goes on the blue, you get your purple tint, which is pretty neat. And then your red, obviously, on the maple, you'll get your red again. But because the nature of shellac, it doesn't meld in completely, so you will feel a roughness to where your colors overlap your other colors. Now, with this piece here, I didn't tape off at all. I started out with this part being red, just started from the inside, very light coats, because in the middle, because it's turning at a slower speed, you'll get a lot more color towards the inside. So you start out very far away from the piece in the middle, and then you kind of gradually come out, adding in your layers accordingly.
You were burning it when you did that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Most of my pieces, I am turning while I'm spraying it. Just you get a nice uniform color all the way around it. And then as far as the blue, I just started in from the outside and worked my way in and stopped at about this point here. And so you're not encroaching on this, but no, there's no taping off. There's just just working with your airbrush. You were next, sorry.
Do you sand between each coat?
No. No. Again, if you do have any dripping or any fears of dripping, or if there's any dust in there, you don't want to sand through the layer before, it'll ruin your finish. You don't know what's behind it. I don't take any chances with it. I just all or nothing, like I said. And then when you're done with it, just do a light coat with like a sanding pad, and then apply your finish. Go ahead.
How fast do you spin that when you're spraying?
I usually go between 1 and 200 RPMs. Just to, feel it out. This is definitely something you're going to want to feel out. Experiment. Whatever works for you is what's going to work for you. A lot of trial and error, but which is also nice starting out with your shellac coat to begin with, because you can start over. You can erase that, soaking it with denatured alcohol, probably a couple times, depends on how many coats you put on. You can wipe it all off again and start again. But it's a great way to accent, a boring piece or make a really cool piece even better. I mean, even with this piece here, I just wanted to make the inner part darker, so I used an antique, I think it's mahogany, transient dye, and then just hit it. This was a whiter color bowl, and I just wanted the inside to pop a little bit. I also used it on a tabletop that I made down in my basement. It was a piece of sapelli that I got from one of our friends here, veneer. I wanted it a little bit darker because it was a yellow table. I wanted it to look more like walnut, so I just covered the top of the tabletop with that trans-tint dye, and with the curly sapelli, it really made the grain pop. The possibilities are endless with your trans-tint dyes. There's so many uses for it, and it's so user-friendly.
Yeah.
Yes?
Did you say you do a final sand, and once you're done, you clean it up a little bit?
Yeah, just clean up, if there's any dust particles or...
Using what for that? I mean, a very fine sandpaper?
Yes.
Steel wool?
Yeah. Not steel wool, because the shellac it's very waxy. It's not a very hard finish. I would be afraid that the steel wool would embed some of those fibers in there. So definitely an aluminum oxide sandpaper. And if you're, definitely let it set overnight to fully cure before you apply any sandpaper to it.
And then you put something over it after you sand.
I love lacquer. A clear lacquer. You can use a gloss, semi-gloss, satin, whatever, but your shellac will automatically come out as a gloss. Depends on how many layers you put on it, but it will always come out as a gloss. So if you put a satin to it, that will take over the sheen for it.
You dye it? You sand it a little?
Just a little, just to take off any... I don't put shellac again. I go right to a lacquer for your finish. Yeah, for your top coat.
Lacquer won't,
No, because you used your de-waxed shellac.
oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a very hard finish. Go ahead.
I bought a little jar of powdered trans-tint.
Okay.
What different considerations would you use in that?
How do you cut your powdered, or if you haven't even played with it yet?
I haven't played with it yet at all, so.
Is it kind of the same thing? You just...
It's going to be more difficult to use because you have to mix the powder with water to get your color. And then that might not suspend in shellac as well. You might be able to mix it directly with a little bit of that, but it's not as designed for that. It's the liquids that are designed to mix in just about everything.
Could you also use alcohol to,
I believe the powders are water soluble. I don't know if they'll mix in alcohol or not. I wish they would, because they're a lot cheaper than the liquids.
That kind of moves on to, I guess one of the hardest finishes I've heard here is using a graphite finish. It's super hard. Matt Hutchinson can attest to that. He battled graphite finishes for one of your vases. I believe you had.
It was like a flat, wide rimmed bowl, almost like a broad platter, but it had a bunch of little beads in it. They're about 28-inch wide beads across it.
That's right. And so I wanted to try a graphite finish just for the heck of it. And I consulted with Scott. He really didn't know how to go about it. So I used the same, I guess, technique as I did with my trans-tint dyes. Is I got some powdered, very fine powdered graphite, cut it with alcohol first just to get it soluble, and then put it in shellac. I mixed that with shellac to thin the shellac a little bit, and then applied it in the same fashion I did with the trans-tint dyes. And what that did is that, because I tried using, rubbing pencil on it first, I tried crushing pencil lead up with a mortar and pestle. That didn't work. It was always rubbing off. I couldn't get a consistent finish to it. And then, well, how do you put a finish on something that's so doggone slippery? And just couldn't get anything to stick to it. So cutting it with alcohol allowed it thinned it out so much, and then putting it with a bonder like shellac applied super smooth, got me a really consistent finish. And I applied that first to this bowl, and then pinstriped it on top of it, and then put an enamel, black enamel, on top of it. So what you see in these little pinstripes is a graphite finish. And that's a secret that nobody else knows until now. Scott didn't want me to tell any of you guys. Keeping it close to the heart. So it just kind of ties in with the whole system that I've used with these trans-tint dyes that now you guys can try. Give it a whirl. It's just kind of a fun little process. So with that,
Now, you told me a little bit about that thin bowl.
yes.
Maybe you could explain that again, the thin red one?
Okay.
And how you did that with the microwave?
This was one of my thin bowls that I've used. It was just a figured maple, and turned it thin, turned it very green. It was spraying me as I was carving it, and it was so green it started chattering on me. That's where those little marks came from, accents, I like to call them. So I thought I'd play with it, so I sprayed it first with the purple trans-tint dyes, and then resanded it so that only the purple remained, and then dyed it red. This was probably 10 coats of red that I put on this, so I was just experimenting. Some dumb little bowl that I had sitting there. But what I had done is put a first couple of coats of regular shellac on it just to seal it, wrapped it in paper towel, and put it in the microwave on defrost for 15 to 20 seconds at a time. And what it does is it warps it so fast. The shellac seals it from cracking, okay? Because that's one of the downsides of green turning is you leave it in the air for even overnight, you'll get it'll crack, especially with the fruit woods. So if you wrap it in paper towel after you sealed it with shellac, that will keep the moisture in, but the defrost will evaporate it into the paper towel, leaving a very warped bowl after you're done with it. So I actually put it in the microwave 3 different times for 15 to 20 seconds, rewrapped it every time with more paper towel, because the paper towel you get out of the microwave, it's soaked. It is soaking wet with water. So you need to discard that, start it with a new one to absorb more of the moisture, and then you just keep going until it stops warping. So that's how I accelerated the drying process out of a green bowl with no cracking. So,
Then you sprayed the purple and red after that.
yes.
How did you remount it?
I didn't. I just sprayed it by hand. You don't have to apply your trans-tint dye on a lathe, but I just found that if I'm melding colors, it's a better way because it's more consistent. You're holding it. It's like trying to turn a piece without a lathe. It's not going to be perfectly round. You're going to have a lot of sanding after you're done. It just gives you more of a consistent feel, consistent end product if you turn it while you're spraying it on the lathe.
How do you avoid overspray them? Do you have some background?
I've got a multicolored lathe right now.
Wipe things down with using alcohol when you're
Yeah. It doesn't rust, which is it's a really well sealed unit right now.
1970s.
Yeah. So, are there any other questions? Respirator's not a bad idea. Is shellac all natural?
Shellac is all natural and so is the alcohol, but you will get a hangover if you breathe a lot of it.
Well, if you're drinking while you're turning, you're fine.
It's like the hangover, we've done the fun part.
I haven't found it that stinky. Mm-mm. No. Maybe it's the acetone that you're using. But, yep. Any other questions at all? All right, there you go.
This video was made possible by a grant from the Future Girl Foundation.
This video was made possible by thousands of private donations from members and viewers like you. Please visit thegeekgroup.org for more information on how you can donate and become a part of our dreams of Avalon.